and welcome back. We're getting into currently a few ideas for incorporating movement. These are extra movement ideas that didn't really necessarily relate to the stuff that we've already covered. So the first one is a game called Four Corners. It's a modified version of how we used it throughout the lessons. This modified version of Four Corners is more of a classroom game that you can play. Four Corners basically kind of like the game Hide and Go Seek. You have one person at the front of the class, their back is towards everyone, they have their eyes covered, they count down to 10. Or excuse me, they count from 10 down to 1. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. As they're doing that, everyone else in the class is heading over to a corner. The person in control, kind of like the Hide and Go Seek game, excuse me, simply chooses a corner. They might say corner number 2. Everyone in corner 2 would then be out of the game. And the student counting again would begin 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. They pick another corner. Corner number 1, and in between that counting time, students are repositioning themselves. They're going to different corners. Just a fun idea, fun game to play if you ever have time. Next idea, the koosh ball. I did mention it somewhat. Just a quick review, a great tool for using. You want to use a koosh ball. It's a funny squishy thing with like stringy ends to it because it doesn't bounce, it's not hard, it's very soft, and for people that are typically afraid of having things thrown at them, this kind of gets them over that fear fairly quickly. It's a fun thing to use for simple question and answer times throughout class. Simply, hey, what's 2 plus 2? Toss it to a kid, they'll catch it, tell me the answer, toss it right back. That's the koosh ball idea. In transition, say for example you're switching over from something like reading to history. I might say, if students of course have been seated for a little while, I might say something like, class, right now I'd love for you guys to put away your reading books. Before we transition into history though, I'd like for you to stand up, touch any 2 walls in the classroom. You can always modify it, touch any 4 walls in the classroom. Take a seat. As soon as you're back at your seat, take out your history materials because we'll be moving on to that. You've got 1 minute, ready, set, go. You're simply giving them a short break from being seated, and I'll talk about the whole idea of being seated for prolonged periods of time in a little bit. Next idea, with fractions. And by the way, I've also included all of these ideas in a little bit more detail in the lesson plan. For math fractions, an idea. Say my body represents my height. We'll say my height is symbolic of 100%, and the floor is symbolic of 0%. If I had a fraction like maybe 1/9, how could I show that? By placing my hands way down here. If I had the fraction 1/2, how could I show that? By kind of having my hands here. If I had the fraction maybe like 3/4, I could show that as here. So the idea here is for math, when you're talking about fractions, have your students, and you're introducing the concept, have your students show the fraction that they have. If you wanted to modify that, you could have them create a route around the classroom and say maybe from point A to point B they are half and they are hopping. From point B to point C they are 3/4 and they are zigzagging. Those are ideas for you. With language arts, when you're talking about verbs, an idea is to put your students into a pair. One student simply acts out a verb, the other student mirrors that verb and says what it is. So an example might be like running, and the student would mirror it and say the word. For prepositions, a cool idea is to have one student stand completely still, they're at a state of stillness. The other student kind of responds to the preposition that the teacher gave, maybe beside, so the student would stand beside. Or maybe nearby, the student would stand somewhat nearby. Or above, and they'd put their hands above. Or beneath, and put their hands kind of low to symbolize that. That's an example. From there, modified mingle game, the math mingle. A mingle, mingle, mingle. 5 plus 3. They'd get into a group then of 8. A mingle, mingle, mingle. 100 divided by 100. They'd get into a group of 1. Those are just a few extra ideas. Thanks again. You can find all of these in a little bit more depth in the lesson plan section. Thank you very much. Take it easy. See you soon. Hi there and welcome back. This is the last portion of our video, some kind of a closure for you here. Just wanted to recap on everything that we've discussed so far. Remember, with movement, the whole idea, the big idea, the main idea is to take a two-dimensional concept out of a book and make it a three-dimensional learning experience for your students. We want to take 2D lessons that are plain right out of a book, just text, make it three-dimensional and incorporate that movement and get our students moving. To incorporate one other idea that I haven't mentioned thus far, when our students are typically seated at their desk or in their chairs, studies indicate that after sitting for about 15 to 20 minutes, that's considered a prolonged period of time. When that happens, our chairs don't support proper sitting structure in most classrooms, so to say. So as your student's been sitting for about 20 minutes at a time, basically what's happening is there's a curvature of the spine, which places pressure on the spinal column, which places pressure on the discs. Because of that, the brain gets less oxygen. So how do you combat that? Get your students up and moving more often. Please do them that favor, especially for you students who are kinesthetic learners. A few things that we've covered include some of the benefits for incorporating movement within the classroom. We've covered the comic skit and how to go about that. If you recall, that was your students were creating a short 4-panel comic, creating a skit about it, and retelling the story, acting it out, dramatizing it in a non-verbal way. From there, we moved right into the sing cane with gestures. This is one of my favorite lessons because it incorporates both poetry and movement and a few other things there. Your students created a sing cane, they wrote a 5-line poem, then they added gestures to it and created movement in that sense. After that, we moved on to tableau, or the freeze frame. Your students created a tableau, maybe of a given scene, then they moved on to the beginning, middle, end of a selection that they had just read. You could always modify that and have them create a tableau of, say, a comic that they had been working on for a long period of time. After that, we covered a few extra ideas. I spoke a little bit about the couche ball and the benefits of that, incorporating movement, and that sums it all up. Thank you very much for your time, and I truly appreciate your time and efforts here. Thank you again, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.